Yes, sir.
Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's May 5th, 2023 program, Wildlife Conservation, Habitat Preservation, and Animal Welfare Access. In the heart of downtown Eugene. It is a delight to welcome our speakers, Kit Lacey from the Cascades Raptor Center Bird Curator, Joe Mole, Mackenzie River Trust Executive Director, and John Nelson of the High Desert Museum, Curator of Wildlife. Welcome also to all City Club members and everyone who's here with us and listening. It is a pleasure to have you here. For almost 30 years, the City Club of Eugene has remained committed to our mission to build community vision through open inquiry by providing weekly programs that offer the opportunity for community members to learn together, discuss important issues, and consider differing viewpoints. Through their participation, City Club members and speakers model respectful and curious civic engagement, which we hope informs and empowers our community to better engage with the issues that are sometimes difficult but incredibly important to all of us. We create the space for civil dialogue around civic issues. And as a point of clarification, this does not mean that we don't disagree or hold space for disagreement. We engage issues directly, which may also mean directly disagreeing, but in doing so, we hope to support a more informed and resilient community. We believe now more than ever that this open exchange of ideas and information is critical to the health of Eugene and to all cities. We invite you to join us every week as we learn from local, national, and international experts on current local events. And if you value our weekly programming and learning in community, we invite you to support this work by becoming a member at cityclubofeugene.org. We cannot do this work alone, and we are so grateful for City Club's business and in-kind sponsors. A special thank you to our Diamond sponsors and Platinum community partners, Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities that we serve. More information is available at kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians to question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. And you can learn more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and we invite you to learn more at peacehealth.org. The Eugene Chamber of Commerce is serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being, and you can learn more at eugenechamber.com. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides accessible, high-quality, comprehensive educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you also to the City of Eugene and Lane County for their support. And now I would like to invite Program Committee Volunteering President-elect Andrew Kalick to the podium to introduce today's program and speakers. Andrew.
From the coast to the valley, the Cascades to the high desert ranges of eastern Oregon, our state is blessed with extraordinary ecosystems that support an array of flora and fauna. Those ecosystems and the life that rely on them face a multitude of threats, including from climate change that's rapidly reshaping our environment. Today, as Karin said, we are lucky to have leaders from 3 local organizations doing extraordinary work around wildlife conservation, habitat preservation, and animal welfare, to discuss not only these challenges, but also the opportunities they see for involving Oregonians young and old in efforts to preserve and protect our precious planet. So once again, we have Kit Lacey, the bird curator at the Cascades Raptor Center here in Eugene, Joe Mole, the executive director of Mackenzie River Trust, and joining us virtually from the other side of the Cascades is John Nelson. He's the curator of wildlife at the High Desert Museum. Please join me in welcoming them to the City Club of Eugene.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to the City Club for this invitation today. My name is Kit Lacey, and I'm the bird curator at the Cascades Raptor Center here in Eugene. So for over 30 years, Cascades Raptor Center has been working hard towards our mission So our mission is connecting people to wildlife. We believe making those connections is so important because when people make those connections, they then kind of view the world around them, even their own backyard, as wildlife habitat. They maybe change what they're doing in their garden, maybe look out on the road when they're driving. These small steps go a long way in conserving wildlife. Just being aware and having that moment of awe and inspiration. So we primarily accomplish our mission through two service areas, our wildlife hospital and our education program, our nature center. In both areas, we are specializing in raptors or birds of prey. So for a quick rundown, what is a raptor? Raptors are not the dinosaurs. Well, they are distantly related, we could say. But raptors are obligate carnivores, avian carnivores who hunt using their feet. So owls, eagles, falcons, kite, osprey, all of these different birds are raptors. And we think raptors really hold humanity's heart. Think about sports teams. Think about automobiles. Think about the long legacy humanity has had with raptors, gods. You can visualize it, right? And people are drawn to them. And so they're a great starting point for us to really get people involved and interested in the world around them. So our wildlife hospital specializes in raptors. Just have some numbers here. I just checked in last night. Our hospital has seen 116 birds come into our hospital this year. Last year we had 484, and the year before that, 2021, kind of a crazy year, we had 703. It was a record-breaking year. It was a kind of a back-breaking year for us. Our number one goal for any of these animals that come into our hospital is release into the wild. Now, our hospital staff has an incredibly difficult challenge in front of them. They have patients that want nothing to do with them. These patients are terrified. These patients are like, hey, can you just get it over with and eat me? So we have a brand new state-of-the-art hospital that allows these patients to recover and get treatments with as little human contact as possible. And again, our number one goal is releasing those birds into the wild. On our other service area is our nature center. So we have over 35 ambassadors that call the Cascades Raptor Center home. These animals are extraordinary. It takes a very special animal to have guests walking by their homes every day, to have these birds share their personal space, actually choose to share their personal space with their trainers every day. They are a great collection of ambassadors that allow us to make those connections with people. Now, we don't have the big numbers of guests that come through our doors, but last year we saw over 35,000 people visit our center. And these people are coming from all over the world. So it's not just the school kids in Eugene. We have international guests. We have folks from the East Coast. We are fairly well known as well in the raptor community. So we are really leaders in the industry of bird training and raptor training. I'm currently the president of the International Association of Avian Trainers and Educators. So this is a professional organization that is working towards the best standards of bird care and training. And I'm happy to announce that this organization is going to be having their annual conference next year right here in Eugene, Oregon. So we're really excited to show Eugene off and to bring folks from all over the world right here and to visit our center. Now, we do have challenges. Certainly, funding is one of them. We do not receive any government funding for the work that we do. We actually pay the government to do the work that we do. We have permits for the birds that are in our care through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And our rehabilitation department has to have 2 permits, a permit with the state of Oregon and also with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we get to pay for those permits. So how do we raise funds? How do we do what we do? It's not inexpensive to feed raptors and to run a hospital. So we do earn some income through our admissions, programming, of course, memberships and adoptions to our organization. But that grant writing, we fall in this weird area. We're not companion animals. We're not directly preserving land. The conservation work we are doing is out there in this kind of weird space. So we work really hard. Some of our team is here today. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you after the program about how we are trying to really expand our reach and get more of that funding. But we do see that we have a lot of opportunities. And our opportunities are that we can help folks see how they can make a difference right in their own backyard. So climate change, right? It seems very difficult. How do we save the snowy owls from the hot temperatures in the Arctic? Seems overwhelming. But there are things that you can do in your own backyard. You can take down the barbed wire. That is, useless on your property. I've seen what happens when a great horned owl gets stuck in barbed wire. It is not pretty. You have a rat problem or a mouse problem. Instead of just going to the store and grabbing some rodent poison, fix the rat and rodent problem, because again, I've seen what it looks like when a western screech owl dies of rat poison or a red-tailed hawk. So these are things that we can do. They're actions. We can help folks find the way to make those differences. Taking nets down on baseball fields that trap raptors in the middle of the night. So there's steps that we can do. We can take action. We can actually make a difference. Even if those differences seem small, I think when we get everybody on board and working together, then those small differences really add up to big change. So I'm hoping that everyone here at the City Club takes some time and comes up and visits our facility, come meet some of our amazing ambassadors, and see just the work that we're doing here for our greater Oregon community. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Joe.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Karin. Thank you, Andrew, and everyone for being here today. I'm Joe Mall, the Executive Director of the Mackenzie River Trust. I've been remarkably fortunate when it comes to living with nature and wildlife. I've lived in many urban and rural parts of the eastern and western U.S. and for extended periods in Asia. I've seen incredible places and been close to and even held animals that are stuff of dreams, including grizzly bears. Last week, a tiny little bird, an orange-crowned warbler, was stunned on the sidewalk outside our office, probably from a collision with a glass door. He was breathing heavy but upright, so I picked it up in my palm, held it there for a few moments, and then carried it over to a quiet area behind a bench and placed it on the duff beneath some shrubs. In that moment, while it was in my hand, there was an element of what you read or see in maybe a mystery or a sci-fi story where somebody hugs someone or shakes their hand, and all of a sudden they see their past and their future. Holding this 2-ounce bird, my imagination jumped immediately to the 1,000-mile journey it had taken in migration. A phenomenal thing, bird migration. And through that brief, direct connection and a pause in my mind to give it some further attention, I felt like I was a part of it. I could actually feel a pulse of adrenaline, like the runners this past weekend at the Eugene Marathon, excited to get on their way. The warbler, by the way, was gone a while later. I hope he can avoid the windows and other trickery for the rest of his life. These days, there are plenty of observations that as a people, we suffer when we lose contact with nature. or how much we benefit when we have it. How many people get the chance to hold a bird? Hunters get to hold birds. Yeah, Kit gets to hold birds. But hunters get to hold birds that they've harvested. And as soon as I say that, I'm sure we have a split in this audience between those who are not comfortable with the thought of directly killing such a beautiful animal as a pintail or a ruffed grouse, and those who are. And these splits are one of the reasons we are challenged these days to figure out our place in the natural world and to make decisions on how to interact with it, to manage it, care for it, even as we continue to draw on it, to consume it, as it cares for us. We are a people in the United States that likes to band together and express our values in actions. So we have a wide variety of groups that do just that, give you a place to contribute and participate, aligned with other people who share your values. Here in Oregon, we have learning-focused groups like the High Desert Museum, Cascade Raptor Center, Mount Pisgah Arboretum. You have Cascadia Wildlands and ONDA and the Western Environmental Law Center and others that are focused on policy and legal action. You have groups that arose from common experience in the outdoors, like the Oregon Hunters Association, the Mackenzie Fly Fishers, and the Audubon Society. You have groups like all of the watershed councils all over the state, which provide forums for community discussion and on-the-ground work to heal some of the areas on the earth that we've been a bit hard on. And in my case, the work I've been drawn to with the Mackenzie River Trust, where I worked previously with the Nature Conservancy, you have groups that say, for creatures like the warblers and the grizzly bears and the oak trees, it's important that we simply set aside some areas and let the forces of nature, natural processes, hold sway. We work with willing landowners to protect and care for those cherished places. And many of you know that we do so now beyond the Mackenzie watershed, throughout the Upper Willamette Basin, over into the Umpqua, and out on the Central Oregon coast. And I suspect most all of you in the audience, and many more of you listening on the radio or online, support and participate in one or more of these groups, and I thank you for that. It's been a dream for me to do this kind of work professionally for 30 plus years. And I also suggest that, like me, you've had a chance to consider the paradox we often face of caring for something that we continue to consume with gusto. These days, in many cases, our connections with wildlife and plants, land and water, how we behave and interact with each other, are affected by law and policy and permits, like Kit mentioned. You can catch that fish, but put it back safely in the river. You can kill and eat a turkey, as long as you do so after driving out of the city to a space with fewer people in the country, rather than grabbing one in your own backyard. You can shoot that grouse landing in the field, you can shoot that goose landing in the field, but not that goose, which at first glance looks the same, but whose numbers have dwindled such that their future is threatened. You can water that field, but you have to leave some water in the stream because it is needed to support this frog's breeding season. It's natural that we attend first to individual species because that's how we often see the impacts of our success as a species, our growth in numbers, and our comfortable lifestyles. It gets your attention when you have to reckon with the fact that something as iconic as a bald eagle was pushed towards the brink of extinction because of our economic success, our lifestyle choices. So collectively, we've developed cultural norms and behaviors and a system of laws and policies to restrain ourselves a bit. As more and more of us make our way to live in the Willamette Valley and other parts of Western Oregon, we're going to need to restrain ourselves a bit more, okay, a lot more, for this to work for all of us, people, birds, bears, bull trout, bees, and buttercups. In the time that I've been involved with it, the land and water conservation community has undergone a pretty significant shift in terms of how we characterize and practice self-restraint. You remember Gary Larson, the cartoonist, The Far Side. One of my favorite, and I think one of his most brilliant pieces, shows this couple driving a Jeep down the road, and they're dressed in safari gear, and one has a pair of binoculars maybe. And they're in this savanna-looking place, but the animals presented are all contorted and packed into sealed 8-foot-tall mason jars. And the title of it is Wildlife Preserve. It's an incredible insight into what we've been discovering about conservation biology and our relationship with the natural world. With good intention and good effect, we've set aside some areas as preserves, and in some ways intentionally kept nature at arm's length, at a distance, because we could see that collectively we were having an impact on the survival of wolves and desert tortoises and big-eared bats and Fender's blue butterfly and Kincaid's lupin, and the list goes on. But what we have learned is that small or large, preserves alone don't cut it. Our behavior in those preserves and pressures from the outside of the preserved areas, the fact that plants and animals for whom we've set aside preserves don't see those boundaries and move beyond them while others move in, that without the freedom to roam and interact with the elements across a much larger landscape, populations and even species can weaken and disappear. So now you hear more talk about the need to attend and care for the larger landscapes and the natural processes that play out across them. You see river restoration projects like those in the South Fork and the main stem of the Mackenzie River near Finn Rock, where we're working to broaden its reach, because a system in which a river is disconnected from its floodplain is far less productive ecologically. You see examples of fire being brought back onto the lands more frequently, both because it stimulates growth and ecological diversity. You hear a lot more discussions of connection rather than separation. And we are finding that in the process of attending to these larger scale landscapes and the biophysical processes, human communities can be safer and more healthy as well. It's a good thing that the stories and perspectives and voices of Indigenous peoples are now getting more airtime. Not as museum pieces about days gone by, but as current day norms and practices and ways of reconsidering the challenges that nature and we as people face, given the outcomes of 500 years of thinking and acting on opportunity, 500 years of being successful at building and constructing, 500 years of relatively unrestrained growth. If you've not encountered it yet, I really recommend picking up Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. There's a rich and growing number of other relevant books and artwork and music and thought pieces out there along similar lines, including many locally. But Robin takes Indigenous history and perspective and weaves it with that incredible tool, Western science, that we continue to wield on a daily basis to help us live satisfying, fruitful lives. Perhaps at the risk of making a huge generalization, I'll just say that Indigenous perspective, aligning so much with a sense of being in nature, helps us slow the heck down, and we could really use that. There's no requirement that you be of Native American descent to slow down, to pause and appreciate the mallards in the Amazon Canal, the thousands and thousands of geese wintering on baseball fields and riverfront parks, even though they can make a mess of it all. To chuckle at that paradox. We don't have to go to a national park or a wilderness area to connect with and savor the wild. It's all around us and within us. Of course, we do have problems to address, and we can't afford to simply appreciate nature. We do need to act. And paradoxically again, often our best action is to show some restraint. Many of you know that in 2010, the Nature Conservancy worked with the Wildish family, and were able to purchase about 1,300 acres of land now known as the Willamette Confluence Preserve. It's adjacent to Mount Pisgah, the Howard Buford Recreation Area. It includes a big area of floodplain between the Middle Fork and the Coast Forks of the Willamette River. Over the following decade, they somewhat magically reworked this former gravel operation into a nature reserve that is much more accommodating habitat for plants and critters. Then in January of this year, they transferred the property to the Mackenzie River Trust for the long-term care. We, in turn, are now working with folks from Lane County, Friends of Buford Park and Pisgah, from the Arboretum, from the watershed councils of the Upper Willamette, with Willamette Lane Parks and Recreation District, and the cities of Springfield and Eugene, and Oregon Parks and Recreation District, and the Siletz and the Grand Ronde folks, and neighbors in CV Loop, and many others, many of you, to consider these questions. What do we do with this place? What do we do with ourselves in this place? Can we care for it in a way that feeds our souls while also nourishing young Chinook salmon and western pond turtles, and meadowhawk dragonflies and meadowlarks, and maybe even someday sandhill cranes? This will take all of our creativity, all our best stories, all our best science, and indeed, at many levels, all our collective restraint, to ensure the progress of habitat restoration, to give the plants and critters there a chance to reestablish and thrive. The Willamette Confluence is not open to the public. To those few who may be ignoring the signs and walking out there on your own, I'd ask you to please restrain yourself from doing so. We are offering some limited tours, as unsatisfying as that may be, but for the health of the place in the long run, we need time for it to heal and for us to collectively figure out options for its future, including when and how and where we can offer more access. Humans are explorers. We want to get out there. We want to learn and touch and manipulate and understand. But like the award-winning movie proposed, we seem to be driven frenetically towards everything, everywhere, all at once right now. And that can make us rush around and figuratively and literally trample things that we are in love with. But there's another way to think about that expression. Circle back to that orange-crowned warbler I mentioned. Its health is related to what I do, to the choices I make, both to support bird conservation and to acknowledge the impacts of my lifestyle, my consumption on the air we breathe and the water we drink. Through that bird, I have a connection to migration, to all birds, to the forests and prairies and wetlands among which they move. Everything, everywhere, all at once, doesn't have to be frenetic. It can instead be a more reflective, paying attention to those connections we have in the larger context with the natural world. It can be the pause you take when you fill your morning coffee maker with water and recognize that that is the Mackenzie River, or it's the groundwater that is connected below you to the mountains above you or the streams in your neighborhood. Those connections shouldn't overwhelm us. They should help us think about how to act, and again, how to curb ourselves a bit. It's our choice to make, and I hope we'll continue to have the courage to do so. Thank you. And with that, we'll be handing it remotely across the Cascades to John. Go. John, go ahead.
All right, I'm assuming that I am good to go ahead and start talking. So thank you everybody for having me here. My name is John Nelson. I'm the curator of wildlife at the High Desert Museum. For those of you who aren't familiar with the museum or have never been here, we are situated just outside of Bend, Oregon, not too terribly far from Eugene, but on the very western edge of the region that we interpret, which incorporates parts of 10 western U.S. states and southern British Columbia. One way to think about the high desert is that if you're west of the Rockies and sagebrush grows there, that's the region that we interpret here at the museum. The High Desert Museum was founded in 1982 by Donald Kerr. Don Kerr was a naturalist, a lover of all wildlife, but especially birds of prey, and he was a visionary. He envisioned the museum being a place where people could come together to learn about the landscapes of the high desert by having up-close experiences with live animals. He envisioned it being something very different than a traditional museum. Today, the museum is interdisciplinary, so I am the curator of wildlife, but wildlife is just one subject that we interpret here at the museum. We take a holistic approach that involves a number of different disciplines, including history, science, history, science, contemporary cultures, and art. And we weave all of these things together to tell a story about the high desert region. We also work closely with Indigenous partners to tell the stories of Indigenous people, both historically and in the contemporary context. So there's a number of exhibits at the museum right now where people get to explore the Indigenous people of the high desert. We do a great deal of public programming, educational programming on all of those subjects. Visitors come from all over the place to visit the museum, and we have students coming from all over the state. So school groups coming in, getting to participate in field trips. We do a tremendous amount of educational work. Last year, we celebrated our 40th anniversary at the High Desert Museum. In 2016, we became a Smithsonian affiliate. And in 2021, we were honored with the National Medal from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is the highest honor that a museum can get in the United States. So although we do a lot of things other than wildlife, wildlife has always been a core component of the way that we educate people about the high desert region since the very beginning. And we've been doing it for a long, long time, since the very, very early days. All of our wildlife programming that we do with live animals is with non-releasable ambassador animals, so animals that cannot survive in the wild. We're still doing a lot of that programming today, but in addition to that, we have seasonally rotating exhibits that also incorporate wildlife. So exhibits like Under the Snow, which is closing this Sunday. Under the Snow is a virtual interactive exhibit that is geared towards children. It's bilingual, and it talks about the needs of wildlife that live at high elevations and rely on deep snowpack for their survival. So kind of getting at the future impacts of these animals as that snowpack starts to decrease. We do care for a lot of animals here at the museum. Currently, we have about 120 animals that we care for at the museum. As I said before, almost all of those animals are non-releasable into the wild. Most recently, it's been in the news that we have a baby bobcat at the museum. So many of the animals that come here are orphans, animals that were taken from the wild at a young age and became habituated to people, and they're non-releasable for that reason. We have others that are from facilities like the Cascades Raptor Center. They've come from wildlife rehab, they've sustained injuries, they're not going to be able to survive in the wild, they need educational placement. And we'll take animals like that in here at the museum. And we still have other animals, like a lot of our reptiles and herps that are pet seizures. So we work with federal and state authorities. When people have animals that they're not supposed to and those get taken away, often they will call us up as a resource to provide human care to those animals long term. We do have static exhibits here at the museum with animals in them, and very consistent with Don Kerr's vision. The exhibits are kind of geared towards trying to get people close to the animals where they'll have an unobstructed view. So there's a number of animals that are on exhibit, but only about half the animals that live at the museum will you see in a static exhibit. We also do interpretive programs daily at the museum, as many as 6, about wildlife conservation. Those programs, those daily talks, rotate seasonally. So every 3 months, the talk lineup changes, and we're doing conservation education on topics that range from carnivore conservation, the return of wolves to the high desert region, the impacts of wild and free-roaming horses, native fish, birds of prey, otters, and things like mule deer. Most of those non-live animal presentations are done by volunteers. I have about 50 volunteers. They're all trained to be certified interpretive guides, and they're the front-facing on the floor, doing these interpretive talks, engaging with visitors around all of those topics, and all of those topics and programs that we give have a strong conservation message. There's 5 wildlife staff at the museum who care for those 120 live animals. Those folks work incredibly hard. Most people think that the work would be somebody's dream job, but the vast majority of it is behind the scenes work, cutting up diets, cleaning up poop, doing all that hard work to care for the animals. But we have a live animal programming component, and the animal care staff here not only care for the animals and provide for their enrichment, we also do all the presentation when a live animal is in a program. The way that we accomplish this is with positive reinforcement training. So similar to what Kit Lacey was saying, the way they do it at the Cascades Raptor Center, we want all of our animals to have choice and control. The animals we have at the museum can't survive in the wild. They have to be in human care, but what we can give them is choice and control over their daily lives, and they get a decision about whether or not they want to participate not only in daily programs, but also in their own husbandry and daily care. We train all of our animals here, not just mammals, not just birds. We'll even train reptiles. So we have frogs, toads, snakes, tortoises that are trained both to participate in their daily husbandry as well as in public programs. And again, going back to Don Kerr's vision, as much as possible when we do these programs, we're bringing the animals out of their enclosures so that people can get up close to them, because we do believe that that is the best way to inspire people to care about conservation of the wildlife and of the landscapes that they need to survive. This includes our raptor presentations. So we still do some presentations with birds on the glove. We have some birds that are unable to fly, but any of our birds that are flighted, we take them outside and fly them. So that takes a lot of work, a lot of training. Visitors get to see this all through the summer in our Raptors of the Desert Sky Show, where 5 different birds will come out in turn. They're trained to come up close to people, fly over their heads in a natural amphitheater away from the museum. This is a move that we're trying to make with all of our ambassador animal programs, getting the animals out of our hands. We want people to really focus on the animal, not the handler. And in the Raptors of the Desert Sky program, while the birds are flying, there's a narrator who is kind of off to the side that's delivering, again, natural history information and very strong conservation messaging about things that people can do to conserve wildlife on the landscape. Things that the museum does that you might not see if you just come and visit us here in Bend are, there's quite a few things actually. So we do have some online offerings, such as this interactive beaver stream that was part of a past exhibit that we had. The interactives get put up online where people can see them. And we've done a number of virtual field trips, including one that I'm particularly proud of about mule deer in the high desert. So there's an interactive virtual field trip that's online. It's been widely reproduced and utilized by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, ODFW, and the U.S. Forest Service to educate our entire region and community about some of the conservation issues that are causing mule deer in the high desert to decline drastically. We also do some field conservation work. So for about 7 years, we were involved with ODFW and the U.S. Forest Service, assisting them in surveying the Deschutes National Forest for rare carnivores, such as the Sierra Nevada red fox. Some of that field work that wildlife staff were doing, we rolled back into public programs. So we've had funding for a number of years through the Institute of Museum and Library Services and now the National Science Foundation to do education with rural families that is based on some of that carnivore monitoring that we did. So we, in 6-week stints, will do this very deep programming with a number of rural families, usually about 7 to 8 families, where we introduce them to biologists. We teach them about things like Sierra Nevada red fox. They get to learn the tools that biologists use to study those animals in the wild, such as radio telemetry. And at the end of that program, they get to produce a book. And the book can be anything that they want, but hopefully some of that conservation messaging from the program comes through in their books, and these books can be checked out at the Deschutes Public Library. In that program, we also teach families and kids to engage with community science that can benefit biologists that are trying to manage species out on the landscape. We teach them to use iNaturalist to make observations. We teach them how to track wildlife, and we get them out in the field to actually do it. So they learn how to identify tracks and scats, make observations of different species, and we get them out in the creeks, we get them wet. And the analogy I always use is it's kind of like Pokemon Go, but they get to do it with real critters. The entire goal being, again, to get people to engage with conservation, spend more time outside, learn about the wildlife and the wild animals that live around them. We have a couple of partnerships with indigenous tribes related to live animals, most notably a long-standing partnership with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, where we attempt to educate our visitors about the amazing restoration work they're doing with Pacific lamprey. So every year at about this time of the year, we get fish, live fish from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and those fish will come to the museum and they'll live here for about a year while they sexually mature. These are adult lamprey that are migrating up the Columbia River. Once they've been here for about a year, the tribe takes them back and releases them into the headwater streams of the Columbia River as part of their restoration efforts for a fish that is increasingly rare. Other conservation science field projects that we've gotten involved in the past, we were involved for many years in a study of lead poisoning in raptors, specifically lead poisoning from the recreational shooting of ground squirrels. So I spent a couple of years working closely with USGS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, trapping birds in the field, taking biometrics and blood samples to see whether or not birds were being poisoned from this point source of recreationally shot ground squirrels, and indeed they were. But we did that work for a number of years. It did result in a few publications. And then the last conservation project that I'll talk about is this particular one where we happen to have a couple of eagles here at the museum that are fully flighted. And a few years ago, we worked with Professor Roberto Albertani at the Oregon State University campus, who was designing mitigation for wind turbines because wind turbines cause considerable mortality for golden eagles. And Professor Albertani was writing an algorithm that controls some of the equipment on the wind turbines, and he wanted to reduce eagle strikes, but he needed to train his algorithm to know what an eagle was and to be able to recognize it. So in order to do that, he came out to the museum and spent several weeks here, and we would take our flighted eagles out into the woods and fly them, and he would film it, and he used the resulting video to train his algorithm to help mitigate eagle strikes for animals in the wild. So we're using our ambassador animals and our good training to try to help affect conservation out on the landscape. So that's a really quick overview. We do a lot of things at the museum in terms of animal welfare and conservation, a lot of education. I could go on probably all day listing other examples, but I'm going to stop right there. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kit Lacey, Joe Mole, John Nelson, and each of your organizations, Cascades Raptor Center, McKenzie River Trust, and the High Desert Museum, for those remarks. How extraordinary, all of these things that are happening in and around our communities. We are going to take a short break to compose questions. I know there are a lot for our speakers today, and so please be thinking about what you would like to ask each of them. I also want to thank today's Sapphire sponsor, Summit Bank. Founded in 2004, Summit Bank is the only independent community bank headquartered in Eugene. Summit Bank is Oregon's business bank, and Summit's mission is to be the best community bank for businesses and professionals, and you can learn more at sbko.bank. Thank you, Summit, for your support of City Club. Thank you also to today's gold sponsors, Sacred Earth Botanicals and Ferguson and Fife Dentistry. And a special thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing, LLC, and Dotson's Photography. We'll be right back for questions about wildlife conservation. Thank you.
All right, folks, welcome back to the City Club of Eugene, and thank you again to our panelists. We have some time for Q&A. We'll get through as many questions as possible. If you have a question, feel free to come up and we can share the mic. But let's start with one about climate change, because last week the mayor herself was here at City Club talking quite a bit about climate change and what she's doing, what the city is doing to combat it. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what you see as local threats to wildlife that are presented, or to our ecosystem, that are presented by climate change.
Well, I'm sure many folks remember the incredible heat dome that we had a couple summers ago. That was really bad timing for baby raptors that were in the nest. And across the Willamette Valley, there was, huge numbers of young that fled their nest. They couldn't fly yet. They just jumped. They were that desperate to get out of the heat. We ended up with a lot of those, mostly Cooper's hawks was the timing for that. So, I guess that's just a very local situation. I mean, we saw what happened. We had 10 times the number of Cooper's hawks in our hospital than we usually would, young Cooper's hawks. So, I mean, we have seen it. Other things, it's hard to pinpoint because, you don't want to just assume, causation. But that heat dome event was definitely pretty big for us.
Can John participate in this as well?
John, what's it like on the other side of the Cascades? Tell us about it.
Oh, here at the museum, yeah. So it's definitely something that we are concerned about. We do a lot of education, things that are impacting the high desert region specifically, increasing wildfire, which really bad for sagebrush ecosystems. With the growing number of people in Central Oregon and throughout the high desert, water use has always been something that is an issue in the desert, but we're seeing increasing stress on water resources, and that is impacting wildlife. Some of our really important wildlife refuges are going to probably go dry in the next 10 to 20 years. And those are all issues that we're educating our visitors about.
Yeah, I'll just simply add in the same way the connectivity, that the loss of connectivity, complete loss of some habitats, high altitude critters are just going to completely disappear and lose. And even at the water level, the connection that a cold water fish like a returning salmon needs to move from cold water area to cold water area, so that connectivity across the landscape is becoming tighter and tighter. And all the more reason for us to do what we can to maintain those connections where we have them.
Great, thank you. You mentioned how lifestyle choices and economic success have contributed to some of the challenges we're facing. But of course, those lifestyle choices have not been made by everyone, certainly not by everyone globally. There are developed countries, there are not developed countries, rich countries, poor countries. And so I'm curious how organizations like each of yours take into account or recognize the inequity and the political complexity of conservation, and how you seek to address those challenges, because I imagine they are complex.
You want me to start with that? Sure. I kick that off. It is no question, I think, within philanthropy generally, within nonprofit organizations generally, if you can look at it as one big mechanism for redistributing resources. And so in our case, for example, I think you see a lot of land conservation organizations in Oregon and in the West beginning to work more closely with tribes, recognizing that in places like Oregon, the change in the access to land that tribes and indigenous folks had 200 years ago, 150 years ago, is very different from what it is today. And so doing transactions, we were able to acquire a piece of property out on the coast recently in consultation and at the bequest of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. And because so much cultural tradition begins with grounded connection in the land, providing access and land itself to the tribes is one step in that direction.
Yeah, so at Cascades, I think, what our goal is trying to, reach more people and have the ability for folks who don't have the resources to always, afford admission to our facility come up and enjoy it through other means. So we're working really hard to make sure that we have that available to, you know, all members of our community when they have trouble affording that admission, to come up and have that experience. Because, you know, for us, being able to make that connection and see the birds up close and personal and learn about them isn't something that we just want, you know, the wealthy members of our community to be able to do.
Yeah, I'll say, kind of echo what was said before about deep partnership with Indigenous communities. So we do a lot of that here at the museum. The Lamprey project that I was talking about is one that I'm really proud of, highlighting the work that's being done by some of those folks. And then working really closely with our community to tell diverse stories through our exhibits, and then also to reach underserved audiences through our programs. So the one project that I was talking about with Sustaining STEM, right now we're doing rural outreach with Latino families in Prineville. So instead of asking people to come to the museum, trying as much as possible to fund projects where we're taking some of these programs out into the community.
You all touched on this question, I think, a little bit in some of your remarks, but this maybe also takes it in a more personal direction, that we know that experience with wildlife or with land conservation, and for people having personal experiences with the wild world around our communities and cities is important to promoting an experience of, or a sense to protect, or a desire to protect that thing, and feeling a connection to it. And this question is about your transformative experiences with wildlife or with land conservation that led you to a career as a professional who is leading these organizations, doing this work, and also teaching others how to do this work.
I'll go ahead and start this one off. I grew up running the fields and the forests next to my family's farm in Wisconsin. So I was just out there doing that kind of thing. You know, knew when you needed to come in for lunch and for dinner. You knew where your boundaries were. I mean, the boundaries were pretty far away, so I wasn't going to make it too far. But then, you know, when we would take family trips, we always would stop at a museum, the art museum, the natural history museum, and the zoo. And that was everything. It was just always so exciting. So just actually growing up outside, though, I think I always thought that I'd probably work with animals someday. John, want to go?
John, how about you?
Are we waiting for me? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. I'll go. I can barely hear. Yeah, my childhood was a lot like Kit's. I think most people that end up working with animals have a pretty similar background. Although I had a little bit of a non-traditional route into my current profession. I actually had kids right out of high school and ended up working in the wood products industry for about 12 years. But because I had always cared so much about wildlife and wild places, I ultimately decided I was going to go back to college and become a wildlife biologist. I started doing that while I was living in Bend, and when I was doing that, I started volunteering at the High Desert Museum, and I just kind of never left. Field work, I did do a little bit of field work working with wild populations, but I think that the work that the museum and organizations like it do, of connecting people to wildlife and getting them to care about conservation, I think it's just invaluable, and I can't imagine more important work.
I grew up in suburban Louisville, and I was very much a sports kid, played all sports all 4 seasons, and was always running around, and made that connection with speed and acceleration and joy of movement. But my parents would get us out hiking or fishing, and what I noticed was that my dad, who was a high school principal and administrator and pretty tense pretty frequently, would completely transform outdoors. And that stuck with me from the beginning. And I see the same thing in myself, that when I feel my shoulders up around my neck because I've got so much tension, if I can just pause and get outside and just spend the simplest time, it immediately affects me. And again, the serendipitous door opening that allowed me to make this a career, that certainly was not a rational path.
Thank you. You've each spoken in one way or another about how young people are interacting with your programs, and we often see them as leaders in the community on all sorts of issues, including the environment. And so I'm interested if you've identified generational differences in how people are evaluating your missions and how to achieve your objectives. John, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so generational differences in how people are evaluating the mission. Without a doubt, I would say that a lot of organizations like the museum are struggling with how to connect with younger audiences, and we're working a lot with that. Our traditional museum goers are from a very specific demographic here in Bend, and it tends to be older folks. But we're doing a lot of dynamic work, our education department, with kids and school groups. And again, I'm just going to keep talking about that NSF project because I'm so proud of it. But I spent last Saturday knee deep in a creek with kids catching crawdads. So I think that kind of work. And kids these days aren't as engaged with nature, so it's really important. But once you get them connected, it just blows their minds. It's been my experience. So.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a sad statement, but what I've heard kind of more often than not with younger kids is, we're doing program, we're talking to them, and, I said, what's your favorite place in the wild? And I had this little child raise their hand, and they said, I've never been in the wild before. I don't know what the wild is. And so I feel there's a little bit of that disconnect because of, must be safe, can't go outside. I mean, kids can't do what I did growing up, just run free. My mom jokes that she had indoor dogs and outside kids. So, there needs to be a lot of work there to help maybe some kids recognize that the wild is just outside, like right out there is some wild, So.
I think that we also, as elder folks in this world, have to give them the space to discover it on their own. And we had a tree planting one day with a bunch of youth, and I went to get something, and I noticed a kid off by himself, talking to himself, and he wasn't on a headphone or anything. I was worried. I thought, uh-oh, we've got something going on. Well, what he was doing was prepping a rap that he had made about the day and the joy that it expressed in an art form, in a musical form. That had I seen that in a nature setting before? No, but I think it's a wonderful expression of the creativity that youth of today can and need to bring to this work, because it's theirs to carry forward.
Kitty Piercy, City Club member. I'm just curious because over time, of course, my whole life I've heard about engagement of other parts of the community in trying to care for our natural resources. But I don't really know what's happening right now, given how our nation is, with engaging the farming community, both the local farming community and more broadly in these discussions about raptors, about these discussions about other forms of wildlife that they have so much impact on and have so much is so much a part of their lives, and how we're trying to keep them engaged to solve the issues that you're talking about.
The microphone's here, so I'll go ahead. So we engage a lot with the local agricultural community, working with them to make their habitats, even their farming habitats, safe, and doing a lot of releases of barn owls, for example. So, we end up getting, some years we get 40 or 50 orphan barn owls into our facility. We have foster owls that raise these owls up, they get ready, and then we release them in appropriate habitat. So, kind of getting the word out that Owls do a great job at pest management, and you don't have to use rodenticides, and you can take that barbed wire down and things like that. So we are out there working and engaging with agricultural community.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and go. We do, tremendous amount of education. I'm just going to keep saying that over and over again, but I think highlighting stories of ranchers and farmers that are doing a good job with conserving the environment and doing it sustainably. And we do that through our exhibits a lot. And then we also continue to do just a lot of rural outreach, going out into the communities. And most of the farmers that we have in Central and Eastern Oregon, definitely conservation is on their mind, and it's something that they're concerned about, and definitely something that the community needs to support, because especially with the development that's going on in Bend and a lot of places around the high desert, farms are going under and those properties are being subdivided. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the good work that ranchers are doing and help them continue to thrive.
Yeah, as a part of that, there's now a statewide Oregon Agricultural Trust focused on keeping farms in farming, for example. And I think on the flip side, we've learned a tremendous amount in the 18 years that I've been in the Willamette Valley from the farming community that has made our restoration projects 10 times more effective in terms of tree growth and shrubs and those sorts of things, and the use of use of water and those sorts of things. And I think to what you'd noted as well, it's one of those places where our lifestyle is one where what do we want to do when we go to the store? We want to bargain. We want to get the lowest price, and recognizing that, well, wait a minute, I'm going to pay more because I know that this is supporting farming practices that are more holistic, is something that I think all of us need to continue to support, because it's that connection to the market that makes this less a community of interest versus another community of interest, and really an economic community and a community together.
Terrific. Thanks so much. That's all the time we have for questions, and now I'm going to hand the mic back over to City Club President Karin Knudsen.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all, and thank you also for all of the questions that have come in through the live stream today about these organizations and your work, and for this program. We're sorry that we were not able to get to all of them. Really remarkable opportunities to better understand and engage with the wild world and wild things also living around us, and we thank you all for being with us at City Club today. This has been the May 5th, 2023 program of the City Club of Eugene, featuring Kit Lacey from the Cascades Raptor Center, Joe Moll of the Mackenzie River Trust, and John Nelson with the High Desert Museum. Thank you, all three of you, for your remarks. Next week, on May 12th, the City Club welcomes you to a program, What's New at Lane Community College, featuring new president, Dr. Stephanie Bolger. We are delighted to welcome her to City Club and look forward to learning more about what is happening at LCC. Also a reminder, you all have ballots in the mail if you are a registered voter in our community, and you are also voting for your LCC board as a part of that ballot, among many other important positions, school boards, I should say, as well as local levies. So please find those envelopes, return them, and enjoy your experience being an Oregon voter. It is remarkable. Finally, also thank you to City Club's volunteers, to everyone who makes these programs possible. Each week, we are always so proud to produce programming that connects with the concerns and interests and delights and questions in our community, and it wouldn't be possible without our leadership, Managing Director Randy Bowers-Payne, leading City Club's work every week, and our fleet of volunteers who make these programs possible. So with that, I just want to say thank you all for being with us today. Go forth, enjoy the wilds, enjoy your community, and we will see you next week.